Life a Man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, today, guys, we've got a very special guest on the podcast, one of the greatest MMA fighters on the planet, certainly one of the greatest welterweights on the planet. It is Rory, the Red King Mcdonald. So this is an MMA fighter who has fought in the UFC and Bellator, King of the Cage, and he's just recently signed with the Professional Fighters League, the PFL. Former welterweight champion over in Bellator. This guy has a 21-6 record in MMA. He's trained at one of the most famous gyms in the entire world. And I don't want to waste a whole lot of time getting into this interview because I just want you guys to get into it. But the biggest reason why I wanted him on this podcast, yes, he's a great fighter. Yes, he's been a part of some legendary matchups. And in my opinion, been in one of the greatest or top two greatest fights ever. But this guy's an outspoken Christian. And I know for some of you immediately, you're like, wait, what? This is an MMA fighter. What do you mean an outspoken Christian? Aren't those things like on opposite sides of the spectrum? But the thing about it is this guy has some unbelievable depth that I'm not even sure you realized. Even if you've watched interviews with him before, obviously most of the time he's being interviewed by the MMA media. So what types of questions are they asking? MMA relating questions, right? They want to know about the punches and kicks. They want to know about the takedowns and the sprawls. Like they want to know about those things. They're not necessarily worried about a guy's spiritual awakening. You know what I mean? But he had one. And we get into it. We definitely talk about it in this episode. Guys, this is one of my favorite interviews that I've ever done. It's one of my favorite episodes that I've ever done just because we go into a lot of really good detail on some fights that I know you guys are already picturing in your minds. And don't worry, we talk about those fights. But man, the depth we get into in terms of what spiritualism is, and not just, spiritualism as, modern society says it, but actually being a disciple of Jesus Christ and being a fighter. What is that like? So guys, without further ado, let's get into it. Rory, the Red King Mcdonald, welcome to Undaunted.Life, a Man's podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. We're so glad to have you on this podcast. First MMA fighter we've had on this show, so we're super excited to have you. And we'll jump right into the MMA questions here. But kind of the first time I remember hearing about Rory Mcdonald, all this hype of you getting into the UFC, is that you were one of the first up-and-coming young guys that trained MMA your whole life. Like, you weren't just a wrestler or a boxer or a Thai fighter that had to learn the other disciplines later. How do you feel like training all of the MMA disciplines as you grew up and as your body developed kind of helped you develop into this championship caliber fighter?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to find a mixed martial arts gym. So they offered everything that goes into MMA, from boxing, kickboxing, wrestling, jiu-jitsu. So I had the opportunity to, get everything under one roof. And I loved it. I loved the sport, and I feel like, the fact that I got to start with the whole MMA mindset rather than focusing my mind on wrestling or a specific martial art. I was putting everything together from my foundation as a martial artist. So I think that's a big advantage for me even now. I feel like I'm a balanced fighter. So if I'm fighting a guy who, specializes in striking, I can hang with him striking, but I could also, I'm comfortable to take him out of his comfort zone. Sure. So that's what I feel a lot of confidence with that.
Well, that's one thing. As I've watched your career, there's been a lot of fights where you'll shoot a takedown and you'll surprise me. And I kind of have a wrestling background. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think of takedown there, because maybe it's kind of one of those standing, trading type fights, and, you're kickboxing with somebody and all of a sudden you shoot that takedown. But obviously that served you well because you started 10-0 to start your MMA career. You won your UFC debut, but you did lose your second fight, a fight that you were winning against the great Carlos Condit via TKO back in 2010. It was at the very, very end of the fight, a fight that you were definitely winning on the cards. So for you, obviously, what was it like losing for the first time? And then I know it changed how you started preparing for fights. But what did you change specifically?
Yeah, it was a bit of a heartbreaker for me. I always dreamed of, being an undefeated guy, and it was a big blow to my ego. And but it was in the long run, it was good for me. It helped open up my eyes and my mind to new things and keep developing. So it was, in hindsight, it was good for me as a young guy. I think I was 21 years old. After that, I decided to move to Montreal and train at TriStar full time with, the the camp of fighters that we have out here, and just I felt like coming from a small town, it it served me well to be around guys that were dedicated and just focused on being the best fighters they could be. Whereas I was in a place where it was a small gym, local gym, that fighters are, they're trying to work jobs, support their families, and do this on the side. So as training partners were kind of falling away, as I was getting more serious, I was starting to struggle, finding, tough competition inside the gym, because some of my tougher training partners, had other things on that took more precedence. They had families to support, and, me, I was all into MMA. So I had to make a tough choice and move up to Montreal.
One that ended up being probably one of the better decisions that you've made, certainly for your MMA career, because you've got to spend a lot of time training one-on-one with one of the greats, and in my opinion, the greatest fighter in MMA history, in Georges St. Pierre. I mean, what was it like training, and what is it still like training with a guy like that who as you kind of alluded to, he's completely sold out to MMA as well, but having that caliber of fighter be close enough to you in weight and also be a little bit more advanced in his career? What was that like having him there?
He was definitely a good mentor. There was a lot of great guys there, though. That was the big selling point with Montreal, though, is there was guys of all shapes and sizes, and they were some of the best in the world coming out of Canada. So it was an awesome opportunity for me to just get in the mix with those guys, see what their mindsets were, see what the training differences were, and, also just learn from the older guys that had been around.
Absolutely. And so, you've probably been asked this question before, but I just got to know for myself, since you've been in the room with them a lot, prime Rory McDonald versus prime GSP. How does that fight go?
I mean, I believe in myself, obviously, but, George is, he's done it all. He's obviously one of the greatest of all time, but it's a question that makes me uncomfortable, because I would never want to disrespect someone like that. And but at the same time, I feel that I could, when I'm at my best, I could be the best in the world. I could beat anybody. But luckily that never had to happen. Me and George have been great training partners for each other to help each other grow as martial artists and competitors. So I was never interested in that matchup.
Right. Well, I got to tell you, if your MMA career goes sideways, you might have a career in politics or public relations, because you side-skirted my hard question, which is cool because I wanted to make you a little uncomfortable. But hey, well, we're settling in now. But one of the big things about your career, when most people think about your career, it really goes back to the night of July 11, 2015 at UFC 189, when you became an MMA legend, when you became one of, if not the greatest fight ever, certainly the greatest fight in welterweight history, when you had your rematch against Robbie Lawler. Of course, the first fight, there was some very awkward refereeing decisions that were made in that fight. You were dominating the majority of that fight. I don't exactly agree with how the judges scored it, but hey, that's MMA. But here you are in your rematch with the Robbie Lawler, but here we are right now. We're about 5 years past that fight. What do you remember now when you look back on that fight, which has become such a legendary fight?
Oh, there was a lot, man. It was one of the most intense moments of my life. It was everything that I put I sacrificed a lot to get to that point, so it meant a lot to me. There was a lot going on in my life at that point too, so it was a crazy time in my life, but I was hungry. Probably not as hungry as I should have been leading up to the fight, but in the fight, I was a dog, and I was willing to, push myself very far. I wish I was willing to push myself a little farther, but, it is what it is. It was a hard fight. It taught me a lot about myself. When you go into those deep waters, you start to have to learn about who you truly are when push comes to shove. So, I'm very grateful for that experience. And even though I fell short in it, I'm happy the way it went down. when I look back at it, and I feel like it's made me a better fighter because of it.
Well, and I got to tell you, that's probably the fight that I've rewatched the most, and I've rewatched it even recently. I watched it again last night, and really the turning point of that fight was in the third round, because in the third round, obviously you could tell right out of the gate you're doing a lot of those teeps. You're teeping him right to the gut, and you're doing some of those push kicks, and he was just eating them for the first 2 rounds. But then in the third round, you could tell that Robbie started to drop his hands just ever so slightly, because those kicks seemed to be bothering him. You know, looking back, that obviously seemed like it was a good game plan. But when you look back on the fight, seeing how it ended up, are there any other adjustments that you would make for that fight?
Yeah, I would have fought a little different. But you know what? When you're under those lights, sometimes the game plan just goes out the front door.
Yeah.
And you just fight. And Robbie's one of those guys that he's great at taking you out of the game plan and making the fight intense the way he wants it, to get into a brawl. And he was able to keep the fight like that, which is, you know, it really played into his strengths, I think. And he's a very durable guy, and, you know, with a very strong will. And I was hoping that I was able to break it, but it looks like he broke mine at the end of the day.
Well, it's certainly one of those fights where obviously you hurt him with the head kick. That fight could have gone either way. You saw the referee, Big John, almost stepped in and stopped the fight at one point. But last question on that particular fight. I've always been curious about this. Maybe the most iconic moment in MMA history is when the horn went off at the end of the fourth round, and, you know, Robbie, you know, spits blood, and you both just stand there in the middle of the octagon, bleeding, broken, and you're just staring at each other. And I remember that being the most gangster thing that I had ever seen in my entire life, especially considering how the fight went. But if you can you remember what was going through your head at that exact moment?
Yeah, I was exhausted at the end of that round. I think it was the end of the fourth, right?
Yeah, it was the end of the fourth round.
Yeah, I tried to put him away in that round, and I really got tired. And I could feel him near the end of that round. His intensity was growing. He got a second wind. He was hungry. You know, it's like he dealt with my best. He thought that, like, he took my best, and now he was full steam ahead. He was ready, you know. And
right.
I think he smelt my hunger diminish, and I've seen him do it before, where he'll come forward after the bell or after a fight, and he'll try to lock horns with guys or lock eyes and intimidate you, because he's a very intimidating person when you're in a fight with him. He has an intimidating presence, and I always told myself, like, I'm never gonna let someone look at me like that and me just turn my back and walk away. So I was determined to stay in the fight, stay in the mental battle at that point in time, and stand my ground, and kind of, you know, engage in that, you know, what would you call that? Like alpha stare down, I guess.
Right. Well, it was the fight inside the fight is kind of what it goes on, because, yes, you have seen him punk guys in MMA before, and it does do something to you psychologically when the other guy doesn't cower and run away. But that is just, you know, he's just one of the many fighters in your MMA career that you've got a lot of runway left, but you've fought a who's who of MMA legends in your career. I mean, just to run the list a little bit: Carlos Condit, Nate Diaz, BJ Penn, Damian Maia, Tyron Woodley, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, Paul Daly, Douglas Lima, Gegard Mousasi, and the list goes on and on. But against those top-level guys, right, including Robbie Lawler, in your opinion, what is the best performance of your career where you left the octagon or the cage completely satisfied with what you showed the world and the result?
I felt like the best I walked into a fight was against Paul Daly, and I mean, I was blessed to go through that fight like untouched, and I mean, it went perfectly. But I really I did feel like when I walked in there was nobody gonna beat me, and I just felt very on top of my game, and yeah, I was ready that night. That's for sure. I felt very good that night.
It was a wonderful performance for sure. And it could be someone from that list or someone that I may have skipped over. But aside from your legendary fight with Robbie Lawler, who was your toughest opponent to date? Who was the toughest fighter you fought?
By far Robbie. Carlos is up there. But Robbie has a different, there's just a difference. When you lock horns with a guy like that, you instantly realize you're dealing with a different kind of a person that you don't come across very often. And yeah, he's a very interesting individual when you get into battle with him. It's impressive. He's taught me a lot just from our experience together, and just to feel his energy and his because you feel like when you're in an intense fight or any kind of fight, you have almost like a sixth sense about the presence of that person you're dealing with, and his was like on another level. Plus, the fact that I've done a lot of damage to that guy, or I've really given my best to put him away or dominate him, and he always is just in the fight mentally and never stops. So that he's definitely the toughest guy I ever fought.
Well, I appreciate that. So obviously you fought him in the UFC, and then you transitioned to Bellator. So you fought for those two organizations, which are very similar, but now you're in the Professional Fighters League. So you're in the PFL. It's very different. It's a tournament format where the winner gets $1 million at the end of the rainbow for winning the tournament. Now that's usually on New Year's Eve, but we'll see how it goes with everything being pushed back with the virus. But what was, I guess, the most appealing thing for you about joining PFL as opposed to just staying with Bellator or even testing the waters with an organization like One?
Well, I mean, their contract offer was, the best one I've got in my career. So, I got to thank God for, that blessing. And just I really like their season format. I think that it's a great structure for someone who wants to stay busy. And believes in themselves to, go through the ringer, which is 5 fights in a year. So, I believed in myself. Obviously, the $1 million prize at the end of the tournament. It was a great opportunity. It's a new start somewhere with people in the organization I believe in. I believe in their approach, and to be a part of that company, I feel like in the pretty early going of PFL, I think that we're going to grow this thing into a major organization in MMA.
When I like that you use the word we, obviously it's like you have some ownership in the growth of what's going on there. And, they've needed to inject a little bit of new blood into the system, and they've certainly done that by adding you. But Rory, one of the main reasons why I wanted to have you on this podcast is because of your outspoken Christian faith. Obviously, this is a Christian podcast where 99% of the listeners are men. So you're going to have a lot of fans listening to you right now. But as long as I have all this right, I mean, you were raised Catholic, but you didn't really follow Jesus for much of your life. But back in 2019, you said that you had an encounter with God, and you are now a disciple of Jesus. Can you actually walk us through what happened during that time period of your life and what that encounter with God was?
Sure. I mean, it really goes back to 2015. After I fought Robbie, I had just kind of I lost the fight, and my life was going down in a bit of a spiral downwards, and I was just living a very toxic life, and my attitude really changed, was starting to get very negative. I was just an aggressive person, and I was losing. I just felt like I was losing control, and I don't know. It was a strange time in my life. On a lot of levels, from my career to my relationships, my family, my friends, and just my own outlook on the world. I just felt like in a very negative, dark place. And, I turned to alcohol, smoking weed, girls, and anything to take my mind off of the internal struggle that I was going through, to not have to deal with it. It was that summer, after summer, I feel that God really sent me a lifeline, because I don't know where I would be if I just kept going down that path. And I met my wife to be, who is a Christian, was raised in a Christian household, and a believer. She had spent time in Bible college, but we met, and she invited me to the church she was going to, and I had some experiences in my teenage years with the Lord that I never forgot, and I always had an interest for Jesus. I knew it was real. I didn't have the know-how or the structure around me. I don't know if these are excuses, but I didn't feel like I knew how to walk the walk with Jesus. There was a lot of things I didn't understand about faith, I guess, but I had some experiences that were very real, and I was always intrigued about God and a relationship with them. So when she invited me to her church, at this point in my life, I was very skeptical. I had heard and listened to every worldly outlook on Christianity and religion in general, that it's bad, or they just want your money, things like that. So I went in with a very skeptical outlook, but I was interested at the same time because of what I went through years before. So I went there, and the pastor, who is my pastor today, Pastor Steve Jeswaldi at Good News Chapel, I was very taken back. I was when he started talking, I'd never heard a preacher talk like that. Coming from a Catholic background, it just felt like it was very genuine and real, and from the Word, it was based on what's in the Bible, and it just wasn't something I experienced before. And immediately, I felt like God working in my heart and my mind. That was I was just locked into what He was saying, and I had a craving to know more and to come back, keep coming back. So I was still living a pretty toxic life at that point, but I think from that point on, the Lord started doing a work in me, in my mind, because I was very hard-headed. I had a really hard heart and outlook on life and people, and I treated people poorly. And, it took some time, but I kept coming to church. I started reading the Bible and, actually taking a look for myself, what things said, and praying. And, in a matter of time, I gave my heart to the Lord, and I got baptized, and been doing my best to walk that walk ever since. And God has continued to do a work in me, develop me in my walk as a Christian. So it's been amazing. There's nothing better than having a relationship with the Lord, that's for sure.
Well, Rory, I really appreciate you spending some time getting into that and explaining it to us, just because we talk about all the time that there are guys that are kind of like you, an MMA fighter or a former military, or a guy that could be categorized as, rough around the edges, or just a rough guy in general, that, maybe they look at what's going on inside the church and they have some of the same thoughts that you did. Like, oh, they just want your money. It's just a bunch of wusses in there anyway. Like, I don't want to be one of those guys. But to see one of the baddest dudes on the planet to basically come full circle and embrace Jesus as their Lord and Savior, that's pretty substantial. But it's obviously had more of an overriding impact on all the areas of your life. Obviously, there's a lot made about the comments you made after your fight with John Fitch in Bellator, and we're actually going to play those comments here.
I landed some good stuff in there, but I don't know, something something is just, it's hard to sometimes pull the trigger now, I guess. I don't have that killer inside. I don't know, it's really hard to explain, but I hesitate a little bit now. I don't know what to say. It wasn't my best performance.
Are you feeling that as you get older and you have more things happening in your life, that you're changing as a fighter?
Yeah, as a man, I feel like God has really called me the last little while, and I don't know, he's changed my spirit, changed my heart, and it takes a certain spirit to come in here and put a man through pain and stuff, and I don't know if I have that same drive to hurt people anymore. I don't know what it is, but it's confusing, but I know the Lord has something in store for me, but he was speaking to me in here tonight, and I don't know, it's a different feeling.
Well, how do you feel? You know your next matchup is soon. You're going to come back right away against Neiman Gracie. How are you feeling as far as getting back in this cage basically in a month and a half?
I have to get out of here and reevaluate. We'll see what happens. Tonight there was a mix of emotions in there. I landed some good stuff, but there was something different.
All right, well, congratulations on moving on in the welterweight tournament.
So in there, you said a lot of things that were really important, but the biggest takeaway for me was this quote: "It takes a certain spirit to come in here and put a man through pain." I don't know if I have that same drive to hurt people anymore. It's confusing, but I know the Lord has something in store for me. And you've had fights since that time period. You've obviously, within a few days, you were doing interviews kind of explaining the context behind those thoughts. But can you kind of explain that time period and what that was like after that fight and kind of what you feel like the Lord was teaching you during that time?
Yeah, no, I was during that time I was very hungry. I was in the Word every day, and I was really getting close to God. I was pursuing Him, and a lot had been changing in my life the last few years. I have 2 kids now. I'm married. I have a house. Just a different lifestyle. So I guess my hunger for God at that time was misplaced. Like, my outlook was a bit off, I guess. I didn't understand maybe that God could use me in the field that I was currently in. I felt like so many people, when they give their lives to the Lord, they go to Bible college, they go on to do things like that. And I thought maybe that's what I need to do. But I realized shortly after that wasn't my calling. That right now this is the field that the Lord is gonna use me in. My career for now anyway, and to give my testimony, to evangelize to people around me that I come into contact with, to be an example of a man of combat. Hand-to-hand combat, that lives for the Lord. So I guess I was just confused on my purpose as a Christian, and I was hungry to serve God. I just think it was a bit misplaced at the time.
Gotcha.
But since then, I've learned a lot, and I've spent some time with the Lord, and people around me, and feel a lot more clear on and a lot more driven. Because when you're having confusing thoughts, your drive is a bit, everywhere. So I feel focused, driven, and I feel like I'm living out my purpose at the moment. And I'm thank God.
Well, with all that in mind, the thing that you notice when you watch fighting, and I've been watching watching MMA since the very beginning, whenever my dad took me to, the video store and we rented UFC 1 and UFC 2 and we watched it. The thing about it is you don't seem to see a lot of outspoken Christians in MMA. Why do you think that is?
I think it's pretty hard to do it. You're in a pretty dark world. Not dark, but like there's people who are living in the darkness in that world, you know, that are drawn to it. And there comes a lot of criticism when you speak out about Jesus in this world, as you probably know.
Sure.
And so when you use that platform, when there's people that don't know the Lord hear you talking like that, you know, they're obviously going to, you know, have some negative outlooks on you. So I think it takes a bit of boldness and courage to do that, especially when maybe sponsors or opportunities that, you know, you question, are you going to get the same opportunities if you speak out your faith? Are you going to get the same sponsorship if you speak out your faith?
Right.
So it also comes down to money and your career goals. And then obviously, you know, the persecution, you know, well, you know, verbal persecution.
Right.
But, yeah, that's, I think that's probably why.
That's understandable. Well, we've got a couple of sections here left since we've got you for a little while longer. So this first one, I just want to ask you some lightning round questions that are about MMA. So with all of these, you got to give me your answer in 30 seconds or less. We just want the nuts and bolts of exactly what your answer is. So you up for it?
Yeah, I'll do my best.
All right, here we go. First question here. What is the most important discipline to master for MMA?
Jiu-Jitsu.
All right, easy enough. Fantasy matchup. If you could fight with anyone in MMA history in their prime, who would it be and why?
Robbie Lawler.
Okay, sounds good. Why would you do that?
To see if I have what it takes to beat him now.
Sounds good. All right, where does your nickname, the Red King, come from?
It actually is the meaning of my first name, Rory. I had gone through a string of bad nicknames, and you
got to tell us some of the bad nicknames. You got to tell us now.
First one was Waterboy, given to me by my team, my martial arts team, Toshido, and my coach David Lee. And I always disliked that because it's like in reference to the Waterboy, the movie, Adam Sandler movie.
Right. Yeah.
Because I had a lot of rage and anger. So when I would get like beat up or whatever, I would just let it all out in this kind of fit of rage. They called me the Water Boy because I was only a little kid when I first started training. So I don't know. And then I didn't like when people started calling me that in UFC interviews and at the UFC. I was always embarrassed by it. So I changed my own nickname to Ares, the God of War. And I know it's kind of cringy, that name too, but I was just very desperate to come up with something different, and I was kind of just thinking on my own, like, you know what, I gotta change this name, it's driving me nuts. So changed it to that. I really, it wasn't sitting well with me either after a few years, and I was talking to a friend, another fighter, Cajun Johnson, about like, oh man, I really don't like my nickname, it sucks, you know. And we were talking about the meaning of my first name, Rory, as shooting ideas around. And we looked it up or whatever. It said that there was Scottish kings. I don't know from what time frame, but they called them the Red King. And I just felt like that was a pretty cool name. I wouldn't feel embarrassed about that name. So that's where it came from.
Very cool. I'm glad you went into overtime to explain that one. Next quick question here. Who is your favorite fighter to watch of all time?
Oh, that's a hard one. George St. Pierre.
All right. Who is the most underrated fighter ever?
It's a hard question for lightning round. Sorry.
I know.
Because there's so many guys. I'm gonna screw this up probably. There's Dan Henderson. I feel like didn't get that much credit. He accomplished a lot.
Absolutely. Never got the strap in the UFC. A lot of people hold that against him, but hey, you know, he had some great wins. All right, this next one is you've got to give me your MMA Mount Rushmore. So these are your top 4 Favorite fighters ever. And to do you a favor, just to do you a favor, I'll talk slowly as I tell you mine. Okay. So here are my top 4. I got GSP, who I think is the GOAT. Then I've got John Jones, because if the United States has to send John Jones to fight against another country and we can send one war, I'm putting him on steroids and we're sending him over there to take care of business. Then I'm going to go with Daniel Cormier, because I think when people look back on his career, they're going to realize how underrated it was, the guys that he beat and the guys that he ragdolled. And the last guy is Conor McGregor, just because he almost single-handedly elevated MMA up 2 or 3 levels in like a 2 or 3 year span. And he was the first double champ in the UFC history. I mean, you just can't take that away from him, even with all the antics and the stuff that, we wish he wouldn't do. So that's my MMA Mount Rushmore. So go ahead and give me yours.
Okay. So I'll go with number 1. I'll go with Royce Gracie.
Okay.
Just because of, the very first UFCs, he was a dominant champion as a smaller guy. He's, he did a great thing. He exposed the martial arts world to the power of Jiu-Jitsu, and started a snowball effect of guys cross-training different martial arts, and we're here today because of it. Then I would probably put Chuck Liddell, because he was an influential person in me being attracted to MMA in my early teenage years, because he was a champ at that point in time, and he was just crushing people. Then I would put George St. Pierre, because he's, GSP, he's one of the greatest of all time. And then, I don't know, there's a lot of guys you can put
I know.
I mean, I feel bad, because I want to say Demetrius Johnson, I want to say John Jones, I want to say all these different guys. But I feel like you said, if we're gonna go to war and use one fighter from each country, I feel like John Jones would probably beat everyone. So might as well put him up there.
Just the idea of him being on like rhinoceros steroids with like a bow and arrow and a spear, like that's the scariest thing possible.
Yeah, you probably don't even need him on steroids. You just probably need him happy and healthy and not distracted with, a toxic lifestyle.
Yeah, there is that too. All right, last MMA hit, a quick question, and I'm going to put you on the spot. Who is the GOAT?
George St. Pierre. I just feel like, the losses he did have, he avenged them dominantly. He's just accomplished so much. The guy was just a dominant force all the time. He just crushed his career. No one did what he did. It's incredible.
Absolutely.
And so is John Jones. I mean, and what Demetrius Johnson did is incredible, his UFC run. Anderson Silva. There's amazing guys who did amazing things, but I'd have to give it to George.
Excellent. Well, the last section of the podcast here is something new that we like to do with people. It's a section called, What Would You Say to Someone That Said? And I'm just going to fill in the blanks there, because these are things that I've either wondered about. These are things that I've heard other people say. It'll give you kind of a chance to answer your critics. But just like before, you got 30 seconds or less to answer. So you good for it?
Yeah.
All right. What would you say to someone that said MMA will eventually be the biggest sport on earth?
I would agree with them. Back then, there was not much going on with MMA, but I believed in it. I believed in the sport and where it was going. So I would have said I totally agree.
All right. What would you say to someone that said Rory McDonald just went to the PFL for the easy paycheck? Hey, now I have never said that. For the record, it's dummies on Twitter, so you can't get mad at me. All right.
But, no. Hey. I've seen the comment. Don't worry. I'm not bothered by it. I get it. I don't think it's going to be easy at all. These guys are hungry. They want to make a name off a guy that's, fought in the UFC and for the title and things like that. I made a name for myself. These guys want to come take me out. And the format itself, if you just take a look at that, it's going to be a heck of a time getting through, the training camps, the weight cuts, and obviously the battles that I'm going to have to get through. So it's a bit of it's a grinder to get through that format.
All right. What would you say to someone that said prime Tyron Woodley would beat prime George St. Pierre?
Oh, not even close. Not even close. I totally disagree.
I mean, I tend to agree as well, but whenever Tyron was going on his long string of wins, people started talking like that was real life. And, hey, I may run into Tyron at some point, so I don't want to talk too much, but let's just say I agree with you here. Next one. What would you say to someone that said Rory McDonald will never fight at middleweight ever again?
There's a very good possibility. But you know what? I don't know. The older I get, I'll probably want to cut less weight, because I do feel like I'll be in this sport for a long time still. So the older I get, it might happen where I transition. But I'm not a very big guy, so middleweight would be, compared to these guys that are at middleweight now, I'm not there. But we'll see. We'll see what happens.
All right. What would you say to someone that said Rory McDonald and Douglas Lima will never finish their trilogy?
I think I have a feeling we will. I think we're gonna fight again. I'm gonna beat him.
Well, gosh darn it, I hope so. Y'all's first fight, that was incredible. I was on pins and needles that entire time. Obviously, he exploded your leg at one point, which was awkward to see, but a very, very good fight to watch. All right, just a couple more here for you, Rory. What would you say to someone that said Christians shouldn't be fighters?
I think they have a misunderstanding of what being a Christian is in a relationship with the Lord. I think they are taking certain things from the Word and twisting it to manipulate their outlook on what it is to be a Christian.
Fair enough. Last question of the day. What would you say to someone that said Rory McDonald will go down as one of the greatest welterweights in MMA history?
I think they're right. I have a lot to accomplish in this career. A lot of people have me down and out right now. They think that, because I've gone to another organization, they're just counting me out. They're not even looking at me being a part of the top group of guys anymore. I'm going to go past 30 seconds, by the way, because I like this question.
No, you're good. You're good.
I feel like after Douglas beat me this fall, his name got elevated to, is he the best? Would he beat the champion UFC, Kamaru Usman? They really he beat me. He won the fight. I'm not going to take it away from him. But basically, the general outlook that you hear is from that fight, him beating me by decision. He won the rounds. I won't take it away. But they're taking him as being a dominant force, possibly one of the best in the game right now at welterweight. To me, being completely forgotten about, and that I'm done. That there's nothing left for me, and I'm super excited and motivated to come back and absolutely shock people. And only the Lord knows what's left in my career, but I feel like I'm going to come back and have the best years of my life, the best years of my career in the next bunch of years to come. And I think it'll really be a cool story looking back. So that's what I'm motivated, and that's what's giving me some hunger right now to come back and really show people where I'm at and who I am as a fighter.
Great answer. I appreciate it. Well, man, we talked about a lot of different things today. We went all over the map, but that's all for me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
Not really. I appreciate the interview and, talking about my faith. It's a great opportunity to tell people about the goodness of God. So I thank you for that opportunity. I'm looking forward to sharing this with my followers on social media, and I'm hoping this gets out there to a lot of people so that they can see that God loves them and that He has a plan for their life. Where they're at right now doesn't determine who they are. God could change whatever is wrong in your life, or whatever things that didn't go the way you expected, or this virus thing. People are so afraid, but if your heart is right with the Lord, the Word, of God, that you know that at the end of the day, everything's going to be all right because you are right with the Lord, and He's going to take care of you. And in the end, we win because of Jesus. So, praise God.
Well, that is the gospel right there. We really appreciate you preaching it to our listeners, and we'll make sure to get you back on here at some other point because you probably forgot to tell us something. So we got to get you back on to ask you some more questions. But Rory McDonald, thanks for coming on Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you guys for tuning into that podcast episode, man. We really enjoyed our time that we spent with Rory McDonald. You don't expect a guy to even get that deep because even when you ask someone about their spiritual walk, you'll get kind of the cursory glances and overviews of, this is good and I like this and, God's good and Jesus is cool. And but he actually went deep and he kind of gave you a peek behind the curtain to get an idea of what's going on in that guy's head. So I absolutely love that. Guys, we're going to do a quick resilience boost before we let you out of here. As you know by now, we are a men's ministry, and our mission is cultivating manly resilience. And specifically, we do that by providing content like this podcast that helps you forge spiritual, mental, and physical toughness. So the links I've got for you today, I've got a link to the Robbie Lawler versus Rory McDonald 2 fight. I've also got the Rory McDonald versus Douglas Lima 1 fight. That was at Bellator 192. We talked about that a little bit in the show. I've also got his after-fight comments, his post-fight comments whenever he fought John Fitch, whenever he was talking to Big John McCarthy. That was the audio that we played earlier in the show. And then also we've got a full episode called The Retrospective, and that was an interview that was done with Rory McDonald. It was called Facing Nate Diaz, Robbie Lawler, BJ Penn, and more. And the last one I've got for you here is Rory McDonald discusses his move from Bellator to the PFL. It was another interview that he did. All right, guys, thanks so much for listening to the podcast. We really do appreciate it. If you would, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or Stitcher, and refer your friends to listen and share this on social media. Guys, if we deserve a 5-star review, please leave us a 5-star review and a few sentences letting us know why you like the content. I'm currently booking speaking engagements for the remainder of 2020 and the beginning of 2021. So if you want me to come speak on your podcast, at your men's event, at your church, at your team, hit me up. info@Undaunted.Life. Again, that's info@Undaunted.Life. Our website is www.Undaunted.Life, and you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter @Undaunted.Life or Facebook.com/Undaunted.Life. Check out our free devotionals on the YouVersion Bible app. Just search Undaunted.Life under plans. And as always, we want to thank the band August Burns Red for allowing us to use their entire music library for our content. The intro-outro track on this podcast is their song Defender, which is off their latest record entitled Guardians. The links to all of this are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep cultivating manly resilience, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical toughness, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.